What's going on, everyone? My name is Jake. This is where I talk capes, and we're back after a wee while on this channel today. As you can see by the new additions to the back wall, the wall behind me, there's only one thing that we can be talking about, and it is, of course, Thunderbolts asterisk. Now, as I record this video, I have seen it on opening day, which was May the 1st. I had a bit of a hectic day dealing with a lot of stuff, and just, But I got it done, went to go see the movie. I'm back now, back in the house, back in the flat after watching the movie. And we're going to talk about it. Now, this isn't going to be my full spoilers video. This is going to be a spoiler-free video talking about the movie. I'm going to go see it another couple of times at least. I might go see it probably one more time, actually, before I get a full spoilers video out. But don't worry, this is not a video that contains any spoilers for the movie Thunderbolts, so you don't need to worry about that. But just right off the bat, before I actually talk about the movie itself, I really enjoyed this. This is a movie that I had really, really high hopes for. I think if you speak to anyone that kind of knows me, you would know that, that I've had high hopes for this for quite a while. I think going into Big Brave Bird, I was hopeful, and I did have high hopes, but I kind of knew I was going to be let down. I just knew that, that movie was, by all accounts, made by committee, whereas this was pushed enough. This movie was pushed enough. I don't think this movie started production until it was fully officially finished, which is a bit of a miracle for Marvel these days. I know David Harbour said that the third act of Black Widow was being reworked as they were filming Black Widow. However, this movie was pushed back, and by all accounts, it was only pushed back so they could finalise it, which, funnily enough, when you start the movie with everything in place and ready to go, you're going to get a good movie, because I thought this was a really good movie. I think this is maybe the most I've enjoyed a Marvel movie in a very long time. I think, realistically, it's probably been my favourite, it has been my favourite Marvel movie since Endgame that's not Guardians 3. And I think a lot of the criticisms of kind of modern and more recent Marvel movies that have been levelled at them, the way that they all kind of feel disconnected and nothing kind of feels like a direct follow-up and things like that. Nothing really feels like it's tied in. This movie does feel like it's tied in, and not to kind of jump ahead to the credit scenes, but the credit scenes in this feel like they matter. Whereas, like before, it's like the Eternals set up Eternals 2, and Shang-Chi set up a second Shang-Chi movie, and things like that, whereas they don't feel like they are necessarily carrying forward the story of what is going on in the wider kind of MCU. This movie does that, which I think puts, one, a lot of weight on this movie, a movie that realistically shouldn't feel as important as it now does after watching it. But two, it kind of reminds us of what made these movies so special. The fact that you're like, oh, this is what's coming next, and these little teases for what's coming next in the broader plot, and not in the sort of narrower, kind of more insular, like, this is what Shang-Chi is going to do next, sort of thing. But that's all the preamble done now. I am just going to talk about this movie and the things that I liked in this movie. And the thing I liked the most is the characters in this movie. I think all the characters here are really, really great throughout this film. I think as well, one thing this movie does is, despite the fact that it's a kind of broad team-up movie with a lot of characters from a lot of different projects, you don't really feel the need to have watched everything that they're in. Now, I would imagine you would enjoy this movie more if you have seen the kind of, the required reading, as it were. If you've seen the projects that kind of tie in, the introduction of a lot of these characters before this movie, I imagine you would enjoy it more if you've seen all of them. I know I've seen all of them, and I really, really enjoyed it. Whereas, some people I know who haven't seen all those projects from before, they still thought it was good, but, they didn't get as much out of it as I got out of it. But that's kind of the case for all MCU stuff. If, you hear good things about this and you think there's a good time that you want to jump back on and you're wondering, what should I have watched? I don't really think this requires that. The same way that Guardians 3 requires at least having watched the two Guardians movies and also Infinity War and Endgame before you get into Guardians 3 to really get what they want you to get out of Guardians of the Galaxy 3. I don't really think you need to do that here, because they do a good job of introducing all these characters at a level that is easy for people who haven't seen the previous projects, but as well, not one that dumbs it down and kind of treats people who have been watching all of these like they're idiots for it. So I think it's a really kind of fine balance to walk, but they walk it very, very well. The projects that you maybe would want to look out just to make sure that you've seen everything. Ant-Man and the Wasp is the introduction of Ghost, so I would imagine you want to watch that. Just the first Ant-Man and the Wasp, not Quantumania. As well as Black Widow, which introduces Yelena, the Red Guardian, Alexei, as well as Taskmaster. Also Falcon and the Winter Soldier, obviously you kind of see more what Bucky is doing post-Endgame. That also introduces John Walker's US Agent. I believe that also introduces Julia Louis-Dreyfus's Val is introduced in that show. And then I guess maybe Wakanda Forever and Captain America Brave New World, but even still you only really need to know a couple of things from those movies. The thing with Wakanda Forever is we find out that Val is the director of the CIA, and in Brave New World we find out that Bucky is running for Congress. That's really it. And even still, I don't think you necessarily need to have watched any of them to understand what's going on, because this movie introduces all these characters at their base level. We get a sense of who Yelena is. She is, a sort of spy, black ops assassin, doing shadow contracts for the US government. We get a sense of who Alexei is. Her former. When we meet Alexei, he is watching back old VHS footage of the Red Guardian at parades, so we kind of know that he's probably like a super soldier. And then again, throughout the movie, he explains who he is. That he's a super soldier who was given a Soviet super soldier serum. When we meet Ghost, we find out Ghost is a. Ghost can phase through walls and does. Excuse me. Trying to record a video here. When we meet Ghost, we find out that Ghost can phase through walls and also pretty much does what Yelena does. When we meet John Walker as well, we again just know that this guy is so full of himself and he's so up himself and he thinks he's the best guy in the room, who also does shadow contracts. And then also Taskmaster we see is highly skilled at this as well. And one thing the movie does really, really well, especially in the early moments of it when this team is beginning to form, is they do point out that everyone just does the same thing, just different variations on the same thing. They all just have guns and can shoot people. But despite the fact that all of these characters essentially do the exact same thing and fill the exact same role, their personalities shine through to the point that it's differentiated. So, we get a sense of who Bucky is and where he is at this point in his life. We get a sense of who John Walker is and what he's done to get here. We get the same with Yelena, same with Ghost, same with all the characters. We get a real sense of who they are. And even if you have never seen anything Marvel, you can just jump in on the Thunderbolts and be like, oh, okay, I know who this person is. I know what their role in this is. I know who he is. This is kind of like this. It's very easy to work out. There is, of course, one more main character to talk about, and that is Lewis Pullman's Bob, Lewis Pullman's Sentry, Lewis Pullman's Void, the Void, the Sentry, and Bob, all the one character. I thought he was fantastic here. Now, the Sentry is a character in the comics that is kind of impenetrable. Like, if someone comes to you and says, I want to get into reading comics, where should I start? You're never going to go, go to Sentry. That's where you should start, is reading some Sentry books or reading some Sentry stories. Yeah, that's never going to happen, because the Sentry is a fairly impenetrable character to kind of get into. And even me, who's, I've not read all the comics in the world, I don't want to come on here and act like I am the world's biggest, number one authority on reading comics. I'm getting there, I'm reading as much as I can, I'm reading more, I'm learning more, but even myself, and I've read a few Sentry stories, I still find Sentry fairly impenetrable. I still find Sentry a little bit hard to fully grasp and to fully get my head around. But I think this movie does a really, really good job of, I don't want to say dumbing Sentry down, but sort of simplifying the Sentry story into something that is a lot more digestible for a kind of wider audience. Like I say, the Sentry lore can feel fairly hard to break through and can feel fairly hard to fully get your head around. To be perfectly honest, I'm still not entirely sure. My head is entirely around, all of Sentry's backstory and lore and things like that. But I think the way that it was presented in this movie was very, very good. I think the way that they keep the base elements of it, tweak it just enough, like they do in a lot of MCU things, where they just they take the base of it and they tweak it just ever so slightly so it makes more sense for this particular iteration of the character. I think it does work really, really well here. And I think as well, to kind of lead me into the next point of something that I really, really enjoyed about this movie is properly allowed the time to explore its themes. When the movie opens, we hear Yelena's voiceover from the trailer when she's talking about how she doesn't feel fulfilled and how she's thrown herself into work and how she's just working through it. And ever since her sister died, she kind of feels, fairly directionless. And that's kind of explored throughout. Every single member of this team feels directionless. Alexei is a washed-up Soviet super soldier that no one really remembers. And, his life has fallen apart. Ghost, spoilers for Ant-Man and the Wasp, was in some sort of multi-dimensional accident where now she can phase through walls and has spent years of her life living in a lab because, she is trying to learn to control when she phases and when she doesn't, because she can't live a normal life because she phases through matter and things like that. And again, spoilers for The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, John Walker is dealing with the fact that he was given the shield to be Captain America, and he went mad with power, and he fucking decapitated some dude with the shield on everyone's fucking cameras. Like, all these people are dealing with the fact that their lives are going to shit, and I don't think that I would have trusted the MCU to pull this off, especially in recent memory, before I saw this, because this movie has actually allowed the time to explore its themes and not to sort of get ahead of myself from a spoiler review. This isn't really a spoiler, but it does a really interesting final act. The third act is very interesting. It's not your typical, it's not the typical heroes come together and punch the bad guy until the bad guy can't be punched no more, and they go, we saved the world, we're the Thunderbolts, yeehaw. It's not that kind of a movie, and one of the things that I've spoke a lot about, especially with kind of more recent Marvel projects, is how a lot of these movies feel like directed by committee. I think even ones that I love, like Multiverse of Madness, there are points in that film where you can kind of tell that this was done by the Marvel higher-ups. There's essentially no Nia DaCosta in the Marvels, which she has since came out and said that they just wanted someone there to shoot action. I was already given this movie just to make. One of the things as well, one of my favourite projects from the post-Endgame MCU is Shang-Chi, which I believe is on pace to be an absolutely perfect superhero movie, an absolutely perfect introduction to this character. And then instead of the big final fight being with his dad and kind of tying into the themes and exploring the relationship between the two of them, the two most interesting characters in that movie, then goes so we can have a big fight with the dragon, because Marvel decided years ago that they was going to have a big fight with the dragon, and you need to write your script around this big fight with the dragon happening at the end. And that just feels like such a turn out of nowhere, whereas I think the way that the final battle is sort of interpreted in this makes a lot of sense for this project, and I think works perfectly. And with the updates on the Sentry character, the way that I said, they kind of distilled what the Sentry is for this to not give us too much lore and too much sort of information to wrap our head around for one character out of fucking 27 million in the one movie. I think the way that they present Sentry and the Void within these themes of depression and mental health and burnout and found family and things like this, I really, really enjoy the way that those themes are allowed to be explored. And I think as well, there is humour in this. I do think this film was really, really funny, but there's no Marvel humour. And I've seen a lot of people say there is that kind of Marvel humour, but I don't really think that is the case here, because the thing with the Marvel humour is kind of undercutting serious moments with jokes and quips, and everyone wants to be like Iron Man, and everyone wants to have the Robert Downey Jr. funny line that everyone's going to remember. There's not that here. There's no sense of that here. Now, there are jokes and there are quips and there are moments that are funny, that are actually funny, but all of the serious moments are allowed to breathe. There's never any moment where a character kind of reveals something big and traumatic, and then someone just walks in and goes, "Oh, sorry, I don't know, I was just passing by, I didn't mean to eavesdrop." There's none of that nonsense. All the jokes are told appropriately and at times that make sense, and all the serious moments are allowed to breathe. There's none of this, he's right behind me, isn't he? There's none of that Marvelism in here, which I think, especially considering the themes that this movie deals with, is the right call. Something I mentioned there kind of briefly, but I want to talk about it more here, is you can really feel the stamp of the director in here. This doesn't feel like it was made by committee. This feels like such a distilled vision of Jake, or a distilled interpretation of Jake Schreier, his vision on this project. Like, it doesn't at any point feel like they were like, okay, cool, but you also need to do this because it's the Marvel movie, which, as I mentioned, a lot of kind of Marvel's recent, more weak work, I guess, feels like that. And I think when you look at the Marvel projects that feel the biggest and are the kind of most well revered, I guess maybe with the exception of like Winter Soldier, because I don't think the Russos particularly have a style, except for just do what we tell you, maybe. I mean, the Russos shoot action very well, and you can see that in Winter Soldier and Civil War as well. But when I think kind of further afield, you look at Ant-Man, for example. I know that wasn't directed by Edgar Wright, but Edgar Wright's fingerprints are all over that. And as well, there is some Peyton Reed flair in there as well, and I think that's why Ant-Man works so well. I think one of the reasons that not Love and Thunder, the good one, the one before it, Ragnarok, works so well is because that does feel like a Taika Waititi movie. And even when we do have, the big final fight as the Marvel final fight that's decided before you get the script, or before you write your script, even still within that setting, Ragnarok feels like a Taika Waititi movie. Even if we go all the way back to the first Iron Man, that feels very Jon Favreau. And that feeling very Jon Favreau isn't really something you can say about Iron Man 2. And I think, you do have these moments where these movies do in turn feel like they're, directed by committee, directed by en masse, basically. And this just feels like, for the first time in quite a while, I guess with the exception of Guardians of the Galaxy, that this feels like such a singular vision being pushed forward. And even with Guardians, that's kind of fairly disconnected from the main story as of right now. Whereas this is part of the Earthbound main story of what's going on and how we are building out this universe in a post-Endgame world. And I think if this does well, which I don't know if it's necessarily in a position to do that well financially, especially because so much of the marketing for Marvel this year has essentially just been focused around Fantastic Four. But again, with Fantastic Four, that already feels like such a Matt Shakman project. It doesn't necessarily feel like a Marvel project. I think if this does well, it's doing well critically. I think it should do well financially. It's a Marvel movie. Marvel movies essentially always tend to make money. If this does well, if Fantastic Four delivers on the promise of it being good and making loads and loads and loads of money, which I don't really see a world that it doesn't for either, and I will not be happy if I have to eat my words. I think if both this and Fantastic Four do well, both financially and critically, we'll see a world in which Marvel kind of loosen their grip on the reins a little bit. Now, I don't think we're going to see that until post-Secret Wars. I think because the Russos just essentially have no creative integrity. But I think going forward into, I guess, the introduction of the mutants and things like that, we could possibly see a world where Marvel, I guess, loosen up their grip on the reins and let these directors and these creatives have more freedom to make the projects feel like their projects. So I think that's another massive success of this movie. Like I say, I don't have a lot bad to say about this movie, and I guess we'll get into that very quickly. A few things I didn't love about this movie. I think the middle of the movie, I think Act 2 feels kind of rushed. I feel like there's some things missing from Act 2. I think there is a subplot with Geraldine Viswanathan. Was that how you say it? Viswanathan? Viswanathan? It's probably not Viswanathan. This girl here from Drive Away Dolls and Blockers, her character Mel has a fairly fun arc, a fairly fleshed out arc in this, in terms of her relationship to Julia Louis-Dreyfus's Val. I think there's some stuff cut out of that as well. I think, especially through that middle part of the movie, like I say, I do think there's quite a lot, not a lot, but it feels like there's some gaps in that, and I think her arc is sort of missing some things. I won't say what in this video, I'll talk about that in my spoilers video, but I think her arc kind of feels a little bit rushed, I guess, to meet a 2-hour movie. Whereas I'm fine with adding another 10 minutes onto this just to kind of have a little bit more in that. As well, we don't see much of Sentry. I would have liked to have maybe seen a little bit more of Sentry. I understand within the context of this movie and within the plot of this movie, there's not a lot more that can be done, but I think there is a possibility for a little bit more Sentry, which I think would have been a lot of fun, because, like I've said, Lewis Pullman is absolutely incredible in this. Like, this is a role that's going to set Lewis Pullman up to be, you know, this is a star-making role for Lewis Pullman. I mean, he was brilliant in Top Gun, brilliant in this. The way he played this version of Sentry and this version of Bob was fantastic. I thought he was fucking excellent in this movie. But again, maybe I would have liked to see more with Sentry specifically. I think all the stuff they did with Bob was fun, what they did with Void was good. Maybe I would have liked to see a little bit more Sentry, possibly. As well, I don't think we see enough of Congressman Barnes here, and you know, with you know, spoilers for Big Brave Bird, there's a bit where Bucky shows up in that, and Sam's like, "Oh, look at that, soon to be Congressman Barnes. You're running for Congress. Oh, look at this. Watch Thunderbolts. He'll be in Congress in Thunderbolts." So they kind of do that there, and in the start of the movie, we kind of see him as Congressman Barnes, but I still think I would have liked to see a little bit more. I think there's more that we can do with that, and I doubt we're going to see him go back to being a congressman now, especially with the way this movie ended. He's probably not going to go back to Congress. He's now just going to be the Bucky that we know and love, and I would have liked to see a little bit more there. But that's really only my issues here. Is it's not that there's anything particularly wrong with this movie. I think this has been the first time I've walked out of a Marvel movie for a while, and I've not said I like that, but, which I think has kind of been maybe the biggest thing about post-MCU Marvel, is I've liked post-MCU Marvel, but I think with the exception of, I mean, I really enjoyed Deadpool and Wolverine, but that kind of feels like its own disconnected thing, so I really enjoyed that. But like I say, with that feels disconnected from this, because it is disconnected from this. It's, you know, the 75th goodbye to the Fox X-Men universe, or whatever number we're on now. Again, Guardians of the Galaxy, I really enjoyed that, but that was a send-off of those characters and a send-off of James Gunn before he went away to DC to hopefully finally give them some good movies on their slate. So to me, that's probably the biggest success of Thunderbolts, is the fact that there's no but. I just really enjoyed this. I thought this was a fantastic Marvel movie. I think this is probably the best, it is the best post-Endgame MCU movie that's not Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and it's, you know, far and away the best movie that, or project that's tied into what's going on in the wider world. And we'll talk more about that in the next couple of days when I get my full spoilers video out. But for now, that is it for me today. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you've seen Thunderbolts, let me know what you thought of it down below. Please don't leave any spoilers in the comments. We're not here to talk spoilers today. We'll talk about that in a few days. But if you saw Thunderbolts and you enjoyed it, or you didn't enjoy it, let me know why down in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can hear my full thoughts on the movie with spoilers in the next couple of days. Don't forget to share this with all your friends and tell them about the handsome man on YouTube with the good Marvel opinions. Once again, guys, my name is Jake. This is where I talk capes, and I'll see you next time.